Gord, do you have the specifics on what the concerns are in terms of the BESS system, the battery energy storage systems? What are some of the specific concerns that either your organization or in your research that you found?
Yeah, I wasn't able to actually be at the council meeting that all the presentations were at, but I did see a special Facebook group was created that exchanged a lot of the information, so I was able to read that from time to time. Going back to how I describe Prince Edward County, the agriculture is very important, and the biggest of the two projects, which would have made it, I think, tied for the second largest project in the world. If you want to visualize it, imagine cementing 15 acres of prime agricultural land and then storing 300 tractor trailer like units on top of that cement. And cement's something that if we had time we should talk about. So I think in what got reported, and I suspect it's all covered in the WCO summary you have, but the destroying prime agricultural land was a large thing for a lot of people. The fire risk, which there's a couple of famous cases, and perhaps more than I, because I'm not the APPEC expert on BESS, but the fire department in Prince Edward County is largely local volunteer, and the fires that were created in Arizona where 8 firemen got seriously injured, in Australia from a installation the same size as the one that was being proposed. It was a really serious concern by a lot of people, both. And then the contamination, if there was a fire, there were local contributors, one going into East Lake on the second project, could have been carrying out who knows what type of degree. Like the wind turbine issue, there had been no health studies, no noise parameters, no guidelines of what even an acceptable noise was. And I can't help but make the comment that for industrial wind turbines, the 550 meters has no proof, no guidance in practice, none. It's amazing that it's still the standard. I'm hoping the current government's going to change it in line with the WCO research. In any event, and that's a serious concern because human health really has to be a prime issue in anything you do. And I guess the other general one that I would say is the companies in our area that were proposing it had no experience, couldn't define the parameters of the equipment they were using. There were no real answers. One group was not able to hold a public session, the other one did. Their reporting of that session was a little suspect at best on how they characterize it. Would be from having been on the call from start to finish, I'd say it was 99 against and 1 for. So I think those 4 would be perhaps for Prince Edward County the leading issues. But again, the WCO looked at. I'm sure they studied the council decision and all the information that I've just quoted, and probably have a whole list of other ones. But we lived through the wind turbine fiasco and the lack of setting standards that were scientific, and we wanted to err on the side of caution and not do it again. I guess would be my summary in the end.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jane, was there anything you'd like to add to that, or?
Yeah, sure. As mentioned there, we did do a review of the number of public meetings that were held in the last IESO request for proposals, which concluded in the middle of February. And the thing that came up over and over and over was there isn't enough information for the municipalities to even be able to assess risks or whatever. We actually saw one proposal come forward to Sault Ste. Marie, and they claimed to have Indigenous support. They did not, but they had emailed some First Nations, so that was good enough. And if you didn't ask the question, you wouldn't have known. But the real issue there was they went to council, and council said, well, where is this going to be? Well, we can't tell you. So how big is it going to be? Well, we haven't decided that yet. And that was true in Prince Edward County too. They were like, they're just really literally putting these things out there, and they're going to develop the plans later. But they're asking for municipal support right now. Mm-hmm. It just made no sense. The other big concern is, again, it was mentioned, the risk of fire, etc. We do not, it's such a new technology, we do not have the proper systems and protocols in place to handle emergencies like fire. And again, these things would be going in the rural areas, small volunteer-run fire departments. You know, municipalities are not prepared for this. One of the fires that was mentioned raged for 3 days. And so you had to have firefighters round the clock, all kinds of risk to them as well as the community. So, and safety regulations, Ontario Hydro has defined setbacks from battery storage and from other hydro infrastructure, but not specifically this type of use. And we don't think that's good enough. Again, Laura, you know, your community members, that's a good question to ask. How are you going to protect us? What are the risks, and what put in place to protect us? But again, there's not enough information for people, not enough information for the municipal governments to make any kind of proper decision about this. I should mention too, we're talking about the IESO and the request for proposals. The government did make municipal approval mandatory, but the IESO until the 23rd of December was behaving as though that wasn't the case. The minister had to write a letter. December the 23rd, he wrote a letter to the IESO. Let me be explicit, he said. Municipal approval is mandatory. But they had to be reminded of that by the minister. So they were just proceeding as if it was a point system. Mm-hmm. And so a proponent of these giant corporations, who again was mentioned, don't have any experience in this. They're just toting up the points to be able to get a successful submission and to get a contract. So again, I would say there's not enough information about this, and it's really, I'm very enthused by your Empower Yourself goal, because this is a perfect example of what you're trying to do. People need more information in order to be able to ask the questions, mm-hmm. so that responsible, informed decisions can be made.
So we kind of touched on this throughout the conversation, but the government, as you mentioned, had given municipalities back their veto powers for certain projects. At the same time, certain municipalities and regional municipalities are being given new powers to pass things without majority support of the council if they line up with what are called provincial priorities. And this is called the strong mayor's powers. How do you think this relates to what's happening in energy development?
I don't know. I think this is going to be tested right now, because this is the first of the new requests for proposal for energy, new power protection. They keep using the word energy, but really they're talking power generation. So we'll just have to see. I mean, I understand the strong mayors is really aimed at housing, but it's very alarming that in that is they talk about streamlining the approval processes, and included in that is things like environmental assessments. So we already know that it's not a very good system as it is. If they're talking about streamlining it or knocking out even some aspects of the assessment, that's a very worrying trend. So I don't have an answer as to what's going to happen. I think we're all just going to have to watch and watch carefully and see what happens.
I guess Jane's absolutely right. It's too early, I think, on that front. I don't think that's why the special powers were granted. I think it is housing.
Yeah, I think one thing, again, of paramount to concern to all Ontarians, but Laura, to your listeners, will be, what is this costing for everything? The IESO process is supposed to be looking at cost, but they're not looking at cost benefit. We had two auditors general in Ontario, Mr. McCarter and now Bonnie Lissick, who said, anytime you do some kind of power generation, you should do a cost benefit and an impact analysis. They never do it. Now with the battery storage, the power generators are getting paid to create the power. Then we presume they're going to buy it back from the grid at the lowest price, and then they're going to sell it back to us again. So what a nice little game is going on at the expense of everyone. And it's really going to hit people hard, low income people, seniors. You know, you talk about homelessness being a concern, that's not going to help. If you have electricity bills going up, and we're being in a system that's literally being gamed by double charging for the same power. So people might want to ask questions about that. What is the benefit? What's the cost benefit? And what are we really doing with all of these things?
If I could add maybe, Laura, to the question that you asked, I would caution people to realize that big wind projects, the way they resolved complaints in the community was to offer money. So when a wind company says, this is what I'm doing for your community, they don't talk about harm to, you know, somebody's foundation or harm to well water or harm to whatever. They say, we offered this much money to this municipality per year for the privilege of having our wind turbines here. And that money becomes hush money, really. I mean, it's an incentive, but it's the way they address problems is they offer money for, you know. So if you happen to have a council that was as financially in seriously bad straits as they were back in 2015, when there was, you know, the amount of money that a community municipal government can raise is restricted. So if you don't have enough money for your snow clearing and your garbage disposal and your recycling and, you know, all the programs that a community has to have, then you look at where else might we get money. And that's what I heard coming from municipal people who don't want a wind turbine around them, who don't want whatever, but oh my goodness, this could keep us afloat. You know, municipal governments don't have the opportunity to raise money in other ways. And so if they have some taxes coming in from wind turbines, it's minuscule, it's not a lot of money, but by the time it's distributed to the municipal government, to education, and the municipality keeps a small portion of it, it might be enough to address some of the problems that a municipality is experiencing with funding. So if you know that your municipal government is financially in difficulty, and you know that somebody's going to come and offer them money to support a project, and if you think they're vulnerable, then people need to give their impression of what kind of harm is possible and the long-term consequences. And right off the bat, at this point in time, the government has stated, and it's been, you know, like tested at the ERT, there is no way of proving harm to an individual, short of ice flying off a turbine blade when it's spinning in the ice rain and killing somebody because it smashes the window out of the car. But in that case too, that'll be hushed up and those people will be offered money. And once you accept the money, then you have a non-disclosure agreement, so you can't tell anybody about it. Anyway, so it's just the money is a serious issue, and both in the way that Jane explained and also in the way that if a community needs the money, you know, like if there is so much demand for, then it can be a viable way out.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Margaret, Jane, and Gord, for joining me today in this important discussion. And I think we've raised a lot of important issues and kind of given people something to think about, that these things are really important to be informed about, but then also kind of what information is available and all that, and what's needed in order to then be informed, to then give your yes or your no, have that meaning, right? So thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you.